Everyone is welcome here, it's time to make new friends. Aquavide Uskava, fill your Glencairn. Share a dram with the spirit of Edmonton.
Slancha, and good day, whiskey brothers, sisters, friends, and welcome to the Whiskey Book Club's part 2 of the second book of season 5 with Dr. Nicholas Morgan, the author of Everything You Need to Know About Whiskey, but we're too afraid to ask. That one right there. And as always, I'm honored to have you, the viewer, and Doctor with us. Well, I want to call him Dr. Nick, but I don't think I should. The viewer with us here today. And really, where else would you rather be where you could delve so deeply into the subject of whiskey than with the author right here, right now? My name's Dolph. I'm the Spirit of Edmonton on social media platforms. I'm the founder of the Whiskey Book Club. I'm your host tonight. Those of you new to the Whiskey Book Club, I'll explain a little bit what we're about. We're a home base. We're a safe place for whiskey geeks that love to share a dram and share a passion for reading, mostly about whiskey and whiskey-related activities. This book is the 23rd book reviewed on the Whiskey Book Club and Nick's second book. Here's the first one, A Long Stride, right up here, if you can see it. I can't see it so well. And Nick, buckle in. We've got a long bio. We'll talk about Nick. We'll try to make him blush a little bit. So Dr. Nicholas Morgan was a University of Glasgow professor of Scottish history before he became the United Distillers. And that was created from DCL and Guinness when they came together in 1990. This was newly created position, and he headed the team that was based at Krabby's warehouse there, now under the Diageo umbrella. He was very active and became one of the first to recognize and tap into the specialist markets, or specialist and collectors markets, these things right over here. And the global marketing director of Single Malts 1997. He managed the Rare Malts program and the Distillers Edition range, still more Distillers Editions over here, and created the Diageo's training course called the Malt Advocates Course. He was instrumental element in the decision to reopen, and we're happy about this, Port Ellen and Brora distilleries. Whew. Welcome, Nick. How you doing today?
I'm very well. Great to be here and continue our conversation, Dolph.
Oh, I'm really happy because we had a lot of questions last time that didn't get. Well,
we did.
I had 11 pages of questions. We got through 6, and now I have 11 pages again. It's a lot. So, as people know, I have a lot of questions, a lot of stuff. We're not going to get to all the questions, and I told Nick, we'll focus on the ones you want. If you don't want to talk about something, brush over it. We'll see it all. So, again, really happy you're here, kind sir. What have you been doing over the last 2.5, 3 months?
Well, it's winter, you know. Keep my head down, really. I've had a few articles published on different websites, and okay. I'm doing some work on Islay whiskey at the moment for someone, so I'm quite busy on that, which is an interesting project.
Let's talk about that for a quick minute. What were the 2 articles?
So the first one was about the what you might broadly call the cask investment business today.
Okay.
And I wrote that jointly with a friend of mine called Isabel Graham-Yule. We had done a talk or a debate in London for the Worshipful Company of Distillers, and we decided we would write up our side of the debate. And that was published on the Barley magazine website, barley.com.
Okay.
For Christmas. And then the second one was a piece about the oldest bottles of Scotch whisky in the world, which were claimed to have been found at Blair Castle in Perthshire.
I heard.
And were auctioned last year.
Okay.
So I wrote a piece about that, suggesting that they perhaps weren't quite as old as some people might have thought. So.
Did they do testing on it?
Yes, they tested. They did some scientific tests on one of the bottles, but okay. Scientific tests don't exactly tell you as much as people think they tell you.
Okay.
And so the evidence, I mean, it was a nice story, but the evidence was sort of circumstantial. So, and all about possibilities and probabilities.
Okay.
So in my article, I just put forward a very different set of possibilities and probabilities.
I have to read that, because my favorite Robbie Burns night that I ever had was, it was put on by scientists here in Edmonton, and they drew scientists, their science club, and it was on whiskey and how they're testing for it and how they could test for it and the different tests that they had for it. So I'd like to, this is probably 15 years ago, so my memory is really scarce, but compare that to what you had. And then what else are you writing about, Isla? Tell us about that.
Well, it's research and writing, but it's for a client, so really I can't talk that much about it. But it's really interesting, and it's about distilleries that I haven't really done work on before. So it's great to be in new places and new stuff and so some great archive material relating to these brands that I'm working on. So that's really fascinating.
So is this research from afar, or have you been able to visit over the holidays maybe, or sometime soon? Do you get to set that up and see behind the scenes a little bit more?
Well, I did the visits last year. Really, I may go back. Well, I mean, I'll go back to Ireland, obviously, but I mean, I may go back for a specific thing, visit one specific place. But I've also been in different archives up in Scotland working on material last year as well, and I'll need to go back and do some more of that over the next sort of few months.
You're a busy guy? Always busy. That's good.
Well, it's good fun, you know. I mean, it's a privilege to be able to do these things, and you know, particularly to get into the archives, which is one of the things that I really love. And you know, the history of whiskey is you know, there are so many books. I'm surrounded by them here, but there's so little archival research in them. And nowadays, most of the books repeat stuff that you've just read in other books now and again and again. Yeah. So I think to get inside archives and really to be able to open up some of the stories which are mistold or not really known is a great thing. And also, what's really fun is trying to be. What I really enjoy is trying to be quite creative about which archives you go to, because very often, if you do go into the archive, you tend to focus in here. But actually, if you move out and just think a little tangentially, you can really find some great information, which otherwise would just be resting in bundles of old documents in a tin box somewhere, you know.
Nice. And you have the chance to do that too. You're not retired, but this is I'm going to say a passion, I guess, as you get past a certain age. For me, it's 55. Everything after 55 is gravy for me. It's money-making time, but it's got to be something you like, I think. And maybe you're in the same headspace as I am. You get to focus on your passion a little bit more than, this is a job that I have to get done so very quick. I can really reminisce. I can think beyond the boundaries that are usually there. So
I can pick and choose what I do. It's a great place to be in, you know. And I'm at my desk at the very latest if I'm working at home at 9 o'clock every morning, and otherwise I'm out in the library or archive working. Finish at 6:30. It's a great day. I mean, you know, until the cricket season starts, and then I begin to watch a lot of cricket. But in the winter, this is great thing to do.
And you probably get to know the people there as well. Like, you probably have a friend set at these individual spaces as well. You get this
in some of them. In fact, people in some of the people in Scotland I used to work with when I taught in Scotland, in Glasgow back in the day, and they've come on and actually they've had really great careers. Most of these people in quite senior positions in archives now. Okay. But it's quite odd to go back and. One of them didn't recognize me, and when I said, you know, it's me, and she said,
we've known each other for 20 years. Come on.
Yeah, no, well, 30 years actually, or 35 years. She just said, but your hair used to be a lot redder.
Okay. Hopefully you didn't comment on her hair, and everything would have been fine. And you know what? With these people as well, with the connections, I'm sure they help you out as well with the broadening of the subject matter. They can give you some introspection.
Oh yes, but I mean that's what they do for everyone. I mean, archivists are there to help people and help them understand the collections, and actually very often say, well, I know you're looking there, but have you ever thought of looking here? Because you might be surprised at what's in that collection, you know. So They're very
You
good.
don't think you get special treatment if you've known them for a long time? Maybe they think about it when they go home a little bit more because they know you're there the next day.
No, I wouldn't like to claim that. I wouldn't like to claim.
No, all right. We're not claiming it, but I'm saying it's possible. That's it. let's roll. Let's get back into the book, but not because I had quite a few questions arising from our last hour and a half discussion that we had, but we would never get to the rest of the questions that I had initially. So I went there. I had lots of questions, but I think I'm going to bring back two. One now and one later when we talk about blends. You stated when we last talked that you were given the opportunity to provoke some people with this book. And I missed an opportunity to ask you who you were provoking and who you think were really pleased with the book. So, and you know what? Provoking doesn't mean they're not pleased either. So who do you think you kind of got a little bit and move their perception a little bit, tried to rethink where they are in the industry?
Well, I think one of the things I was doing in the book, I think, was challenging quite a lot of widely held beliefs about the history of Scotch whisky, different aspects and different areas. Classic one is sherry casks, where there's so much nonsense written. It's unbelievable, and because it's, as I said earlier, because these things are repeated, they become true, they become facts, you know. And I wanted to address some of those issues and say, no, look, it isn't really like that. It's like this, and I can demonstrate it's like this because unlike everyone else, or unlike almost everyone else, I've done the research, you know. Okay. So this is grounded in history. So there was part of that. That was a historical point of view, and I think also I wanted to just jab a little bit at some of the sort of stuff we get today about whiskey experts and people who claim to know everything, and they're online telling people this and telling people that. Yeah. And you know, I don't have a lot of time for that world, and so I prodded them a little bit. I made fun of whiskey collectors, which given that my sponsor at the time was Sukhinder Singh, who's got one of the biggest collections of Scotch whisky in the world, was a little testing, but he found it very funny, I think, the introduction to that chapter. So it's just, you know, shake things up a little bit. And well, generally speaking, I have to say the reaction, Dolph, to the book that I've had and still get from people who read it is very, very positive, you know, really, really positive.
Good. And I like that. And we're going to talk about, well, many more elements about the book. We didn't get into the last section of the book, which we will in a bit, but I still want to go back to maybe this question. So we concluded our previous talks with a discussion on wood and coopers and kind of the interplay between them. So let's continue with the focus on wood. And you just talked about sherry casks. One big question results from the following quote, and let's get that quote for you. That's the first one. Everyone. Nope, primacy in the use. There we go. Did that come up? Primacy in the use. So primacy in the use of these unwanted sherry casks was given not to the Scots, but to Irish distillers. As a consequence, wrote a 19th century trade journal, Irish whiskey became by custom a colored spirit, whereas Scotch was supposed to be white, and in the great majority of cases, that's how it was sold. And that's page 57, if anyone's kind of going back to that. So I wanted to start with this as a history fan who likes finding points in time in history that have a lasting effect. So is this where you believe whiskey started to take a more colored trait? The 1900s, Scotch was white at this time, but Canadian whiskey, I think, was darker. Bourbon was definitely darker. And it had to be aged 2 years at the time. But do you think this is where Scotch is making that turn?
So this is one of those quotes that when you read it, you go, "Oh, that's not what I understood to be the case."
It might be how I read it as well. It's like putting emphasis on certain words that you didn't want.
And this is talking about the 1850s 1850s and 1860s. So it's going way back to that point.
Or the 1900s. Yes. Okay.
And having read that, I obviously was then trying to ground it and get some more information about it. And what I was able to find out is that one of the first really successful Irish whiskey brands, which was called Kinahan's LL, which stood for Lord Lieutenants. Kinahan's Lord Lieutenants whiskey.
Kinner, K-I-N-N.
K-I-N-A-H-A-N, Kinahan's.
Okay.
Early whiskey brand and an early advertiser as well. Quite sophisticated business altogether. And they were involved in a court case in the very early 1860s, and they successfully prosecuted someone for copying what they considered to be or they claimed was their secret way of preparing whiskey. And if you go and look at the court transcripts and proceedings, it turns out that this secret way of making whiskey was using sherry casks. And there's no particular great evidence of sherry casks being used in Scotland in that early sort of 1850s, 1840s period. And so I did then go and try and find references to sherry being used to mature Scotch whiskey, and I think that starts in about the late 1860s. So there seems to be, without getting a lot of detail here, there does seem to be some support for the fact that the Irish started doing it first. And of course, Irish whiskey in terms of the UK in the 1860s was bigger than Scotch. And then the Scotch blenders turn that on its head and really totally take over the trade, really. So it could well be that one of the secret, as it were, to Ireland's success was the fact that they were using sherry casks and they were producing therefore richer, smoother, sweeter, darker whiskies, even if they were only being matured for 2 or 3 years. Although Kinahan's did say their stuff was 5 years old quite early on, when most Scotch, I mean, people talk about old Scotch and it's 2 years old, so very old Scotch, 2 years old. So even if it had been in a cask, it wouldn't have taken on that much color. Certainly by the late 1870s and certainly after that, everyone knows that color, it's like today, color is really important. People like really dark whiskey. So you have people using sherry casks, although by this 1880s and 1890s, there are virtually no real sherry casks to be used. So you have people coming up with ways of making imitation sherry, different processes that you could use to make wood be as if it had a sherry cask from Spain. You've got people selling prune wine and all sorts of patented ways of trying to make your whiskey darker and probably sweeter as well, And of course, there were no regulations, so there was nothing stopping you using these things if you so wanted.
Do you want to talk about Paxaret now? Because this kind of fits in.
Well, it would be the appropriate time.
I think so. So Davin de Kergamo, who we both know, Davin loved Paxaret. He loved the flavor that came with Paxaret and is disappointed in the whiskeys after it was. And do you remember the date that it was? I don't want to say outlawed, but essentially outlawed.
I can't remember exactly, but I think it's the late 70s or 80s.
But widely used at the time.
So I think everywhere. Certainly widely used, and I don't know and have not been able to discover yet when it started to be used as a treatment for casks. But it was certainly widely used after the Second World War, so the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. If you like those whiskies, whether you're drinking single malts or whether you're drinking blends, you've got to like Paxaret because that's being used to treat the casks. And I did a tasting once. We were tasting some old bottlings of, I can't remember if it was Johnny Walker or White Horse.
Okay.
And we had them from from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s through.
Nice.
And we happened by chance, I'm not going to say who it was, but we happened to have a very experienced and distinguished blender, Scotch whiskey blender, who just happened to be in town. Someone had said, I'm going to this, would you like to come? He said, sure, I'd like to come. And we were very happy to have him. And we got onto a conversation about Pax Arette, and his experience went back to the 60s, certainly, if not before. So we asked him and said, well, what was it like when you started? And he said, I remember one of the first jobs you went around with a tub, like a paint tub, a brush, a Pax Arette. And he said, any wood surface, you just sloshed it on, Okay. And it's interesting, if you taste, I've got some up here, but if you taste, for example, Johnny Walker Red Label and Black Label from the 60s and 70s, it has such a distinctive note, and it's not a sherry note. It's quite different. And actually, after a glass or so, I really don't care for it that much. And I think it's quite ironic that I think something's gone on here, because people were talking about how great whiskies were from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, and I was making the point to a lot of them that, well, it's not really whiskey how you would want it made today, because Pax Arette was a huge influence on the character of these whiskies. They couldn't get sherry casks after the war, so they were starting to use bourbon casks, slap on the Pax Arette, give you whiskey character and colour. Now, it's not how you want whiskey made today. But they've all decided that they love Pax Arette, and it was okay. So, yeah.
Sherry, Pax Arette is made from sherry, though.
PX is Pedro Jimenez. It's a syrup derived from Pedro Jimenez, which is a really dark, flavoursome sherry. And the Lagavulin Distillers Edition that you may have on your shelf behind you, Dolph, that's double matured in PX wood, and it's really, PX sherry is delicious by itself.
I had a conversation with Pip Hills 2 weeks ago. We talked about PX. He likes Oloroso. That's his wheelhouse, and he didn't like Pax or PX because he said people play with it too much, and it's too easy to fake that. And I didn't think to ask him about Pax Arette at the time. Is that why he thought so? So, and I think people have a love for Pax Arette because maybe that's the first whiskeys that they had, right? I think maybe that's what Davin had to start off with. So he just naturally goes to what that flavor, what he started loving in the first place. And I did have a 1971 Red Label 2 weeks ago. So we were at the Victoria Whiskey Festival, and I had a friend from a distillery, and I'm not sure how he had 7 or 8 whiskeys from this early 70s, so 70 to 76 in there. We had a 1946 that he found of a Canadian whiskey as well, but we tried the Red Label side by side with the 1971. It was distinctive. I don't want to say it's better. I liked it, but I could tell the difference, and maybe that was it. Maybe it was the Pax Arette that I was actually tasting that made that difference. And it was fun. I like doing those tastings side by side.
No, it's great. It's great.
Do you have a memory for them? If you have a whiskey 15 years ago and you've been in the business for a while, will you have a fairly distinctive memory of the whiskey nose, palate, finish? Or do you still have to bring it forward and have something with it, or try it again to kind of refresh the memory? I don't know.
I have a memory of some whiskies.
Okay.
I have a very distinct memory of some whiskies that I can call to mind. I can think of one which I would have been drinking 25 years ago or more. Okay. It was actually 18-year-old Springbank, and it was just the most astonishing whiskey. Of course, you can't get 18-year-old Springbank these days anywhere. Well, not for love nor money.
No.
So I can pick out some of those old ones. We had in our archives at Diageo, we had, or United Distillers and then Diageo, we did have some very old bottles of a blend called Old Merle, which was a John Hopkins blend, and these were we've managed to figure out that from the rotation numbers and stuff like that, that these were pre-First World War distillates. And that was just an astonishing thing. Blended Scotch was absolutely wonderful.
And nice to have the opportunity to try them. Not everybody gets those opportunities, and there's so many Scotch lovers out there. And I live in a fantastic province where I have access to a lot of older Scotch, just because it's an open market. Whereas in most places in Canada, it's very closed and controlled by a board. And to break into the market, they have to sell an absurd amount of whiskey to get into it. Whereas we can bring in a case of 6 from anywhere within this province. So we have that opportunity, which is great. And I don't have that ability. I have a memory of loving something or not loving something. I have a memory of certain where it would go on the spectrum when it goes from sweet to smoky or perfumey. I can do that generally, but I won't have a very distinctive memory of something. And I have to have it in the moment, and usually in comparison to something else. And for the first time, because I've tried a lot of Canadian whiskeys from the 1960s and 70s and 80s and 90s, and remember liking them because I like Canadian whiskey. Well done Canadian whiskeys have a place in my heart. But this 2 weeks ago, having them side by side is what really reinforced certain things in my mind. So I always have to have the comparison. I think that might be a teacher thing.
I think one of the things that I do tend to remember is mouthfeel.
Yes. Yeah, I should say yes.
Which I think is a much neglected part of the sort of whiskey appreciation process. You know, some people don't even talk about it. They just talk about, the nose and the aroma and taste and finish. But it's, how a whiskey feels in your mouth to me is really important, very much part of the pleasure.
Yes.
So that is something that I do tend to be able to recall very clearly.
And let's go back, because let's get off the sherry and Pax Surette. Let's go Marcella and Madeira. You said in the early 1900s they were using those more often, and I'm wondering where did that go to the wayside? Because you have more experience or more older whiskeys available to you. Have you seen very many anywhere after the 1920s to 2000 use both?
It was before then, Dolph. Again, you're talking about late 1900s, and this was simply because people couldn't get sherry casks, so they started to use Marsala and Madeira to a small extent, I think. And one of the things I do remember reading is that obviously for the producers of these wines, it meant there was a market, so that was good for them. And they actually started putting them in butts, which was not their normal size of cask to use, so that the whiskey people could use them more easily. But I think the preference was always either for what they called plain wood, or for sherry wood. There were, William Lowry, who eventually was part of James Buchanan's business, had a patented method for producing wine-treated casks. I think Diageo still own that patent. And it's a method that's used widely, not just here, but also in Spain. So today people say, well, we've got casks from Spain, but they're probably American oak, and they've been treated rather than what you might call proper sherry casks.
Okay. Well, we know there's shortcuts within the, but read the book and you'll see the other shortcuts. Buy the book. Buy this book right there. And let's go back to blends. We started mentioning, I've got a quote. So mature grain whiskeys with their sweet taste and creamy texture, and we just talked about mouthfeel, took the edge off the and softened the single malts. Grains also acted as something of a catalyst when mixed with malts, revealing new and otherwise hidden flavors. So why do you think this is so? Because I find this is the case when tasting light whiskeys with their peated brethren, I can see those notes. It brings out the lightness, the creaminess. So notes previously hidden come through. And I think that's the beauty of blends, because without, for me, a single malt side by side, it brings out these elements. Within a blend, it does it for me, or the master blender's done it for me. So I'm wondering, I don't know. Let's set you off. What you think about blends and comparison to single malts and their importance. And we talk about that in the book, so let's not focus on this as much, but what you think generally. How's about that? Let's give them a teaser.
Well, so let's start with a sort of historical perspective. Without blended Scotch, Scotch whiskey would not be in the position of, I'm going to use a word that I was never supposed to use when I worked for a large corporation, of global dominance, that it is today, even though today, of course, it's got a lot more competition and people around the world producing great whiskies, but Scotch still has this astonishing leadership position and astonishing footprint in terms of markets and distribution around the world. And that is all down to the development of blended Scotch in the 1860s, but particularly the 70s, 80s, 1890s, and then through on into the 20th century.
Right.
And what blending did, if you will, was in many ways democratize Scotch whiskey. Because prior to the wide scale and commercial blending of people like Johnny Walker and Dewars and all these other producers, prior to that really taking off, single malt had been the predominant style of whiskey that you could buy. It was mostly drunk in hot toddies, so mixed with sugar and lemon.
And anything else?
Well, no, they're generally not everything. Just generally sugar and lemon. That was the thing. It was quite a specific.
So it's just lemon juice essentially, and Pip kept telling me about that.
And hot water. And the whiskies that we used for toddies were in varying degrees, strong. They were very alcoholic, overproof, oily, and if you didn't know much about whiskey, they were really difficult to drink and not particularly very pleasant.
Oh, okay.
So
today that I like. So
today people like us are proud to bear the torch for drinking Ardbeg or Lafroig or whatever it might be. Bring it on. Give me a peatier one. Give me a strong one. All that sort of stuff. Well, that's not how you build a business. You build a business by having something that people can go, oh, I've never drank this before, and it's really nice. So that and that was what blending did. I mean, it just came into the market at a time when, because of phylloxera, there wasn't a shortage of brandy, which is what people sometimes think, but it was just that most of the brandy that was and cognac that was available in the UK was of a very poor quality. And if you wanted the good stuff, it was really, really expensive. So blended Scotch, the big brands, the proprietary brands, came in as really a middle-class drink, respectable middle-class drinking. In a Victorian age when everyone thinks people were tight corseted and didn't enjoy themselves and all the rest of it. Well, people did. They liked to drink. My goodness, they liked to drink.
Throughout
history. This was good quality stuff. If you went into a pub, you didn't really know what you were going to get. And quite likely, if you went into a pub in the 19th century and ordered a blended Scotch, you were more than likely not to have an Irish whiskey or an Irish whiskey mixed with Scotch whiskey. I mean, pub whiskey was a different thing altogether, but the proprietary blends just went over consumers. Of course, the manufacturers were disrupted the whole sort of drinks category, and everyone today wants to say they're disruptors. Well, my goodness me, these people were disruptors, and they turned the whole way the drinks business ran on its head. So malt whiskey distillers who had sort of been in this position of primacy, Highland distillers, you know, thought they were the kings of the castle, and suddenly they didn't have any customers, or rather, the only customers they had were blending companies.
That
So
wanted
it changed the whole nature of the game, and of course, the blending companies started buying distilleries or building them, wherever it might be. And the way they sold was not through traditional wine merchant routes. So the whole retail thing changed as well. And of course, they advertised from the 1880s and certainly 1890s. My goodness, they took advantage of every change in printing technology that was available, took advantage of where are you going to advertise? Transport, buses, trains, railway stations, all this new stuff. Everywhere you went, huge, colorful posters for blended whiskey brands. You know, it was just a remarkable thing for business wise. You know, these guys were so clever. And of course, that position of dominance for blended Scotch whiskey continued through the crisis of the First World War and the Depression and Prohibition, which I think I said last time was probably the best thing that happened to Scotch whiskey, because it really established its quality credentials in the United States, which today remains its most valuable market. You know, per bottle, and make more in the States than make anywhere else in the world, and it's because of that premium feel, that perception that was developed during Prohibition. And that changed really until come the 1960s, late 1960s, 1970s, 1980s. You get a new series of disruptors who come along and turn things back on their head, you know? So you've got William Grant's launching Glenfiddich as a single malt.
Yep.
And you have Jack and Wallace Milroy in London with this fantastic shop selling, first of all, 3, and then 10, and then 15, and then Jack Milroy sent me the copies of their old price lists. And year by year, more and more and more single malt whiskies available through their shop. And they're exporting them as well all around the world. I mean, they're real rascals. And then you get people like Pip Hills coming along, you know?
Yep.
And doing his stuff.
Doing them single malts.
So it's a really interesting story from malts to blends. And now we're in a position where, you know, blends are what, 85-90% of the business, malts are 10-15, but there's far more value in the malts side of the business than there is in the blends, and everyone seems to want to sell single malt. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the interplay between the grains and the malts a little bit. And sorry, I didn't tell anyone. I was doing the double black is what I have today, which I'm enjoying. So yeah, let's go. Actually, one question before I go back to this. In the bars at that point in time, the 1900s, it would have been mostly grain whiskey, I think. Am I correct? At that point in time, as opposed to buying the barrels from the Highlands, Lowlands, or whichever from.
Well, if you're talking about old style pub whiskey, well, it depends. Some of the brewers had their own blends of whiskey, which were, you know, properly made and all the rest of it. But there was a tendency for publicans just to buy whiskey on the open market. So that's why I said you didn't really know what you were getting, whether it was Irish whiskey, Scotch whiskey, grain whiskey, methylated spirits, German spirit from Hamburg, which was used a lot at the bottom end of the market. It was a sort of Wild West time, you know.
Sounds like fun a little bit. Well, we'll see. All right. So here's the quote. It really is a truth that despite the fact that so many malt whiskey drinkers love to wear the respect for blends on their sleeves, like badge of honor, the majority of the malt whiskeys they like to enjoy today are a happy consequence of the success of blends. That's page 91 if you want to look it up. Are blends and single malts mutually beneficial? And I'll be a little bit more specific. Malts give the blends their backbone, but the popularity of the blends have given me the chance to try so many other single malts that I wouldn't have had the chance to try before. And has one helped the other in equal measures? Do you think have mutually beneficial?
No, absolutely. So one of the things that I sometimes read on when I dive into some of the sort of internet whiskey bulletin boards and forums and discussions, is this idea somehow that distilleries, malt whiskey distilleries, make two styles of whiskey. They make the really good stuff for a single malt. Maybe they do that on a Monday. I don't know. And then they make the really bad stuff that goes into blends. And that seems to be an idea that some people have, as if, like I say, on Mondays we make the really good stuff, and then for the rest of the week we don't care, And of course it's not like that at all. A distillery. Let's think of a distillery, a blended distillery, Aberfeldy, which is owned or used to be owned by Dewars, or Cardew, that's owned by Johnny Walker. These sort of distilleries, they make the same quality of whiskey every day of the week, and I can tell you they are measured mercilessly by their organizations on that maintenance of quality. It's absolutely essential. And some of that whiskey will go into different sorts of casks. And the blenders, who of course blend the malt whiskies as well as blending the blended whiskies, will select different types of casks at different ages against different recipes for whatever it is they're making. So if it's Johnny Walker Black Label, it's all got to be 12 years old. There's a recipe in terms of the proportion of malts of different styles and the proportion of grain, and they'll put all of that together, and bingo, you've got Johnny Walker Black Label. But some of that same 12-year-old whiskey that's in Johnny Walker Black Label could be 12-year-old Cragganmore or 12-year-old Kalila, and it's the same quality. The cask types might be different, because you perhaps want a specific profile for your malt that you don't want in your blend. But the qualities are the same, and it's because the blenders have such high standards for the quality of whiskies that they want to put into their blended scotches. It's because of that we have such great malt whiskey that can be bottled as single malts. That's the truth of it. It's not Monday's good whiskey and the rest of the week's bad whiskey. It's that the blenders, for all these companies, and even when blenders don't own distilleries, they have a big say in the style of whiskies that those distilleries make, because they won't buy it if it's not up to the quality and standard that they want. So the blenders call the shots. The blenders call the shots in terms of quality, and it's because of the high quality standards for blended scotches that we've got all these wonderful single malts that we can try and drink, and love. That's where that symbiotic relationship exists,
Yes. Well, and they can sell a bottle here of Johnny Walker Red for $27 and Johnny Walker Black for $40. The double black is, I think, $60, $65. Could you tell me, is it the difference between Johnny Walker Black and the double black? Is it just more Kalila generally?
No, it's not.
All right.
It's a bit more. It's a bit more than that. It's a very different cask. They use special casks, so it's not just about peat. It's about heavily charred casks as well that give double black its character.
Okay, so it should be more caramelly, you'd think. I should try it side by side just to see. And double black was at one point just available at the airports, duty free.
Yeah, that tends to happen very often these days. You put new products out into duty free channels.
See how
duty free channels, certainly before COVID, had a huge influence on what companies did. They made about 20% of most people's business. So if they wanted a new product, you tended to give it to them. Take it, keep them happy.
And just so people understand, the reason why we're asking this gentleman right here, that good-looking guy, about Johnny Walker is because that book right there. And hopefully I'll get to discuss this book with you one day. Maybe we could do that next year. That'd be
Yeah,
great.
no, I'd love to. I'd love
That'd
to.
be fantastic. And that way I can delve into the supplies that I have that are unopened of the Johnny Walker. I opened the double black today just for you, and well, just for you, just for me, because I'm here with you. It gave me the excuse. So thank you very much, by the way. Yeah. Mutually beneficial. Without one, the other one doesn't exist. One's cheaper, the other one's more expensive. It enables them as well because they have such a quality spirit too. And well, people are willing to spend a whole bunch more for the single malts than they are blends for the most part. There are some blends that catch a pretty hefty price tag as well.
Yes,
So
there
there are elite blends to try out there, and I don't think we should be thumbing our noses at any of them. There's so much there.
But here's the thing on the cost, because if you think about it, the cost of producing a single malt is really just the making cost.
Yep, and the barrel. Yep.
And the barrel and the time, and then you take it out of the barrel and you put it in a bottle.
Yep.
But with blends, you've got a lot more complexity. Yeah, a blend like Johnny Walker Black Label's got 30, 35, 40 different grain and malts in it. And it's a much bigger job to actually produce that blended scotch than it is to produce a single malt at 12 years old. So it sometimes surprises me, although from the point of view of my pension, it pleases me that that people can charge so much for single malts. Sometimes I think we give some of the blends away. Actually, I think it's a bit disappointing. Blended Scotch was, in the UK, certainly, was commoditized in the 1960s and 70s due to the power of the new multiple retailers. And the Distillers Company in particular, I think, let its sort of price positioning slip.
Okay.
And to an extent in the UK, at least, it's never recovered from that. So you have great blends, 4 or 5 year old blends, very famous names, which sort of sit on the bottom shelf, and that doesn't feel to me that that's where they should be necessarily.
Okay. No, that's an interesting point, because are they worth more than $35, $40? Yes. They're selling them for $35, $40. I'm not sure what they are in pounds for you. This Canadian dollars, a bit less for those in the States. Is it because they sell so much more, or they can't get more? Is Johnny Walker Red's going to sell an absurd amount of whiskey, so they can keep it at that price? But let's think of the other blends. Is it because they can't get the money for it, or they're just trying to keep up with the Johnny Walkers and the best?
Well, I think if you have a brand with a sort of real leadership position in a category, so take Johnny Walker Red in Scotch, or Jameson's if it was Irish whiskey, everyone tends to build their pricing around that brand leader, and some people will deliberately go underneath it. Some will deliberately put themselves a little above it. It depends what you want to do and what volumes. Mm-hmm. But the price positioning of those brands tends to govern where everyone else is going to sit.
Yep. Well, the big boys get to decide, I guess. That's what puts them in that position. Okay. I'm gonna change gears almost completely on you, Nicholas. So I like the artwork within this book. It's fantastic.
Oh yeah.
Particularly the caricature portion. So I'm going to, if you have the book with you, turn to page 114. I'll show the picture up here, though, on the screen. So I'll try to go. I'll make mine a bit larger. So I'm gonna play with the screen just a little bit. Let's go with this. Make this large. And here's the caricature. I'll leave it there for a second. Could you, in the guise of a quick introduction to the business of whiskey, so that chapter, describe the image and its significance? So why these 11 individuals out of all of those that you mentioned within the chapter? Because you mentioned quite a few, but these ones here, why these 11? And
so first of all, I have to say that we had a wonderful illustrator that worked on the book called Johnny Wan. And when I first had discussions with the book with the publishers, one of the things I said, they were saying, well, we've got to get photographers, get them out, get picture brief. And I said, you know what? Every photograph's been taken. Every photograph has been taken. Why not have something that looks entirely different?
And it does.
And I left that with them, and they found Johnny, who I think had actually done some whiskey work, but I've never actually met him.
Oh,
and so the publishers found him, and the process we had was that when we had chapters, we picked out certain bits, sent them to him. He then went away and came back and proposed a number of different treatments, and we would normally pick his favorites, and then some we did a lot of work on. There's a picture of a collector in his living room full of whiskey bottles, and we spent quite a lot of time on that. And also I remember we had great fun with the distillery guide, with the script that's trailing along behind him, and some rather puzzled looking visitors. So we had really fun with that, but I think it gives the book a really fresh character, and it just makes it feel and look a lot different. And of course, the other thing that has to be said is that who wants to see another whiskey book with an old man in a kilt holding a glass, So we wanted to freshen it up in that respect, both in terms of who was represented in the pictures. And you'll see that it's quite evident. You go through it, you can see this is a book for the 21st century in terms of the illustrations. It's very inclusive, really, and that was very much what we wanted.
And I spent the time as I was reading this. I bookmarked the page, so I had a little, not dog-eared, but a little post-it note on the corner so I could keep going back. So as soon as I read about the character, I'm a visual person, so I always wanted to go back and get the representation. I wanted to see it. I'm not going to ask you to talk about all 11, obviously, or the whole chapter. Just could you pick out a few of them on the page that were instrumental, that you absolutely knew that you were going to have in the picture? Because I don't know if you told your artist that I need 11, or if he read it and just decided himself.
He picked, and we had a little bit of a discussion around that, but we didn't say this is who's got to be in there. He just obviously decided he liked these people and found interesting. So I think bottom left is William H. Ross, the genius behind the Distillers Company. Middle right is Sam Bronfman.
Middle right.
With the glasses, bald head and glasses. That's Sam Bronfman of Seagram Corporation. Very involved with the Distillers Company during the Prohibition period. And then, of course, Seagram's become just this huge business after that, and after the Second World War in particular. And Sam Bronfman, just a huge character in the world of Scotch whiskey, but also other spirits as well, and a real quality person, really obsessed by quality.
Okay, good. And Davin talks about him quite a bit. Davin's got a new book coming out as well. The Canadian Whiskey, the 3rd edition's coming out. So I'm sure we'll be seeing, or I'll be talking to Davin about this gentleman a little bit more.
And then in there also we've got Bernard Arnault and Patrick Ricard. So huge French influence in the world of whiskey. So they're there.
Yep. Okay.
And down in the bottom. Well, in the middle bottom, we've got Shinjiro Tori, so from Suntory.
Yep.
And next to him, we've got Vijay Mallya, who is still a wanted person by the Indian government, and is residing currently somewhere in the UK. No one quite knows where. But Vijay was very colourful, extravagant, flamboyant character.
Good.
And he was in the Diageo offices quite a lot, not when he was on the run, but before he was on the run. And he had a gold Rolls Royce.
Nice.
Which he would park outside the Diageo offices on the triple yellow lines where it said no parking. So he just parked the Rolls Royce there,
Defying them, the
come out and covered in jewelry and the most wonderful clothes, get into the lift, smile and chat to anyone who happened to be in the lift while he was going up to see the boss upstairs. You know, very, very interesting character. But like I said, Johnny chose the people, and he went and found images of them and then did his sort of caricatures there.
All right. Okay. No, that's good to know. I'm sure you agree with them all. Is there someone that he missed that you would have had in there, or did you already tell him that please have this person in there?
No. Like I said, he chose. Had it have been me, well, I suppose just because he was such a character, I would probably have put Tommy Dewar in there.
Oh, okay.
You know, because again, he was extravagant, very, you know, he was a sort of A-list celebrity of his day. So I might, and he had a very nice moustache as well, so I might have put him in there.
Perfect. Okay. So a great way to start it. And I just want to thank you for the business of whiskey. So that chapter itself. Now, I've read a lot of whiskey books and about the history and the mergers, one right after the other. But this one will be in this book, bookmarked for me for accessible use in the future for all of the succinct way that you detail the account of all the mergers, which is important because you try to put it together in your mind, and all the different books, sometimes they overlap a bit and sometimes a little bit of contradiction, but this was very good. So, and
I have to say that, but that was quite hard work to do. It was quite hard work to do it and to try and get a few jokes in along the way, which I did manage to do, I think. And of course, what I would also say about that chapter, which is very important, is that it does start, you know, just reminding people who sometimes seem to lose sight of this, that the whiskey industry is about making money, whether you're making Japanese whiskey, Irish whiskey, Canadian whiskey, American whiskey, Scotch whiskey. It's about making money. And it's whether you're a small distiller, the smallest artisanal distiller in the world, or whether you're a Diageo or a Chivas Brothers, you know, it's all about making money. And I think that's a point that people need to remember, and they need to look, I think, sometimes at the marketing material that they're presented with and just look at it through that filter of money tinted glasses. You know, whenever anyone says anything to you, just remember it's about the cash. It's about the cash.
And there's the quote that we have with him. So Paige, I'm going to get back to that, but I do want to say this because I really like this. I like how you differentiated among the new distillery owners as the doers, the dreamers, and the occasional dodgy dealers. I like that. So a little bit of a poke to them, and that's what you wanted to do. You wanted to poke the bear a little bit. So added to this is the category we all know, and you've named the marketing constructs. And we think about that, and people talk about marketing all the time. Without giving too much away, again, people buy the book. Can you describe the roles of these new distilleries, these marketing constructs that people might want to look more in depth at before getting too carried away by the marketing?
Well, I mean, it starts off, Dolph, by saying, you know, the fact that we've got all these new distilleries is just fantastic, whether it's in Scotland or anywhere else in the world. And I can tell you that if as part of my interview to join United Distillers in 1990, I had been asked the sort of question that sometimes you are asked in interviews, which is, describe to me what the world of Scotch whiskey is going to be like in 30 years' time.
Okay.
If I had told people 30 odd years ago what we now see, they would have thought I was crazy and I would never have got the job. Because what we have now was unthinkable 30 odd years ago in terms of this huge
growth,
vibrancy and energy and input of capital and ideas and thinking. You know, it is remarkable. It is absolutely remarkable. And it's done so much for the whiskey category in general, and then it's doing so much for the individual, national categories as well. And I mean, you've seen it with Canadian whiskey. I actually think it's all to do with Davin. I think he's single-handedly almost rescued a moribund category and brought it back in front of people's attention. But if you'd have tried to describe Canadian whiskey as it is now 30 years ago, people would have called
a well drink.
Doctor.
That's what they'd say. It's a well drink, and that's all it was at that point.
Yeah. So that's one point I think it's really important, to make. But I think the other thing is that some of the new distilleries come in and they make, they want to wear all of their green credentials, very heavily on their sleeves.
Yes.
They want to try and pretend that. I mean, every time you get a press release, they're disrupting something and they're breaking the rules. Well, of course, in Scotland, you're definitely not breaking the rules, because if you do, you're going to be jumped on by the SWA. So there's no rule breaking. There's no disruption. Everyone's green. Everyone's got conscience and all of that sort of stuff. But they're using these sort of social constructs, as marketing. And another one, which I write about there, is terroir, which a lot of people like to talk about, which I don't really agree with from the point of view of whiskey making. Obviously, wine making, it's sort of grotesque cultural appropriation on the part of distillers to take these things from winemaking and just stick them onto what they do with whiskey. It just doesn't really work.
We have a couple fantastic quotes from you on this the last time, so people can go back and get.
Oh, did we do that one last time as well?
Oh, we did. I love the quotes. It was good. But I'm not going to pull them up. People, but
what I would say, and the other thing, of course, is that then after all of that, some people try and sell you a 50 cl bottle of a 3-year-old whiskey for 50 or 60 pounds, and it's absolutely nuts. I mean, what is going on in the world? That's turning things on its head, for sure. And I mean, that's not everyone. So some people are great at their pricing and they sell 70 cl bottles. But people like Arden Merkin really play the game and they do it really well and make nice whiskey.
They do.
But others, I think, are, let's say, chancing their arm somewhat. And I have to imagine that, as with gin, which I think is currently heading into turbulent waters, gin distillers in the UK. And they're suddenly finding in those turbulent waters, there are lots of other boats very close to them, and it's like, what are we all going to do here?
Jump onto.
Yeah. So I think there'll be some of that stuff with the whiskey distillers as well, probably in 5-10 years time. But there are some really good new whiskey makers, and they're going to stick around and they're going to make great whiskey, which is excellent for everyone, I think.
Well, I'm hoping they stick around. I really, really do. I've got 2 quotes here that I want to deal with. Excuse me. And again, it was about the money. So let no one doubt or be in doubt. If the business of whiskey is about money, then the drinking of whiskey is about pleasure. So, and you mentioned this many different times in the book, that it's about money, and you have to focus on the money side of the industry. And you can be as romantic as you want. And this was a comment we had last time. Be as romantic and in love with the industry and with the ideas as possible, but don't delude yourself thinking that they're making it for, I don't know, for altruistic reasons. No one's in a business to make it just because they want to give the whiskey.
And I think that's the point. You put it very well, Dolph. If you read some of the stuff from some of these new distilleries, it's as if they're Robin Hood, and my goodness, the other thing you might want to do about some of, certainly I can't speak for other countries, but in the UK, go to Companies House, which is where all limited companies are registered. Have a look at who these companies are, who their directors are. I mean, some of them are really well financed. They've got marketing ogres who've got years of experience in the drinks business. I mean, people I wouldn't particularly like to share a table with if I could avoid it. And
I would like to pick their brain. You've probably done this enough in your jobs over the past to get their perspective more clearly. I would love to sit with them for a while and just probably not talk to them very much, just hear about how they've manipulated over time. It sounds horrible. I don't mean it to be horrible, but I'd love to know how they
do think that sometimes people forget that you are actually supposed to enjoy drinking whiskey. And I remember being somewhere some years ago, and I was a guest at someone's house, and there were going to be other whiskey people there. And I'd taken along whiskey that I thought was quite special for people to taste, unusual, something they probably would never taste again and wouldn't have tasted before. And so we poured out the whiskies, and these people were sitting round, and suddenly they all pulled out notebooks and sat down and started writing in their notebooks. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, yeah, I'm probably only going to give this a 4.5 for aroma out of there, and then I'm going to give it an 8. What?
No, this is friends getting together. We want to.
Enjoy the moment. This is supposed to be a pleasurable experience. And I think people sometimes put a bit too much thought into what is supposed to be something that you enjoy, and you enjoy with friends, and you enjoy in special places, special moments. Yeah, that's what it's all about, really.
And you wax poetic here, so I'm going to say
yes.
So
yes.
You continue, and I told you this was almost poetic for me. It's beautiful. I love this. The quote's quite long, so I'm going to read it. It's about companionship in the moment or fondly remembered, about friends found and lost. Sorry. It's about places, those destinations hidden in the glass that are brought to life in the act of drinking. It's about music, song and dance, about poetry and the magic of words. It's about sharing something special with generations of makers past and makers present. It's about reflections on the day and reflections on life. It's about safety and satisfaction. It's about pure hedonistic, indulgent pleasure. I like that. It's if you're not enjoying your whiskey, you really shouldn't be drinking it. So that's on page 129. I'm sorry, I gave away, I think, half a page of your book in that one right there. And I agree completely on the social and contemplative side of whiskey. And I want to ask you, have you ever differentiated your whiskeys in your choices based on these categories? I know we generally do. I want this type or that type when you go downstairs and you look at your whiskeys that are there. But have you made a conscious choice, I think, in choosing whiskeys when you're feeling social as opposed to contemplative? When I'm doing social personally, it's something like you brought to your friend's house, something that's unique that maybe they haven't had before that we could talk through as kind of friends. It's like, I like this, I don't like this. And people don't have to like what you bring out all the time, but I like the uniqueness. When I'm contemplative, it's something that's something I've had many times before, usually, and it's usually a heavier one. Thoughts?
No, well, I was about. Sorry, the first thing I should say, well, I know I shouldn't say it, but I was quite proud of that paragraph. Actually, it took a long time to put that one together. I was sweated on that one, but
some rewrites, I'm guessing. Yeah, that's okay. That's good.
But I think I have, done what you suggest, and certainly. So, for example, when the Lagavulin comes out, things are getting quite serious. The conversation is going to go to a different place.
Yeah. Okay.
The music's going to be different. The way that people react to it is going to be different, and that's not an alcohol thing. It's not because it's stronger or anything like that.
No.
It's just because that drink's, I think, and it could be Lafroig, or it could be a Talisker or something like that. Yeah. So I think, those heavier drinks, I think tend to take you into those deeper moments. So certainly how it happens for me,
Okay. And no, I agree. And I don't want to say always peaty. Sometimes it's heavy peat. Sometimes it's heavily sherried. It's just, I don't know, the thing that you generally have the picture on TV with someone beside a fire type thing. That's the contemplative mood, and I don't know if I've been manipulated by the constructs out there already to think that that's how I should be, but that's generally how it is. If I'm sitting there at 11 o'clock at night with my dogs with me and I've got the fireplace on, that's the type of whiskey that I want as well.
Whiskey has a quality that I recall being in a marketing workshop in New York some years ago. And we were talking about the transportational qualities of single malt Scotch whiskey.
Okay.
That it actually takes you somewhere. It takes you, or it can take you to a different level, different sort of plane, and it can certainly take you to a different place.
All right.
And we had a very long and deep conversation and decided actually that we were beginning to make it sound like LSD or something, and that was not really where we needed to go. So we sort of put all of that away. But I've got a story which is quite interesting about this transportational thing.
Please.
Some years ago, we were doing research on Talisker, and I think we were going to do a new label or there was something like that. So we were doing what they call focus groups with consumers. And we sat in a group in London, and there was a process of a facilitator there was asking these people different questions and asking them to do some things and stuff like that. And I think they all tasted responsible measure of Talisker 10 years old as well. Okay. And one fellow was there drawing all the way through. And he said at one point, "Do you mind if I draw?" And the facilitator said, "You can draw whatever you like, but I've got to see it at the end, right?"
Okay. Sure.
So
somehow is that the thought? Maybe.
Well. So he just drew away, and then at the end of the session, she said, "Okay, let's see what have you got? What have you in the drawing?" And he said, "I've never been to Skye.
Okay.
Never visited the distillery." He said, "But I've tasted it and I've listened to some of the things," because she was reading out marketing stuff to them. You know, does that interest you? Does this interest you? All this sort of stuff. And he said, "So this is what I've drawn." And he drew what was almost a perfect drawing of the harbour at Portree, which is on the other side of the island from Talisker. Okay. But it was astonishing. It was this big round harbour. He put in some sort of old-fashioned wooden boats in there as well. But then the mountains behind, which is very much the Skye thing. And it was astonishing. And he had been transported to this idea of a place by this whiskey,
Okay.
And I think that's how it works for many people. And that's what makes those moments really important. Even if it takes you somewhere that isn't Talisker or isn't Ardbeg or wherever it might be, it takes you somewhere that you're not before you have the drink.
Well, that's going to lead me into my next question perfectly, because maybe that's another question that you want to pose to Billy Abbott, Becky Paskin, Broom, because you did ask these people these information. This is one of the funnest parts of this book. So initially, the informative, and which is great. And like I said, when we talk about the mergers, I'm coming back to this book because, and again, if people have read books, you can have 3, 4, 5 chapters on the mergers, and it's hard to get through. It really is. It's tedious, but I have to finish something when I start, so I fight my way through it. This one's not a fight. It just intertwined all the information right there, concisely, very well done. So there's that, the informative part. But then you go on to friends, and let's go here. As always, I've got another quote. Sorry. When you find the real experts. Well, I can't find my quote, so maybe I'm just going to read it. All right, I'm going to read it. But drinking whiskey, and that's the part of it. It's probably the most lighthearted of the chapters that's spiced up with the loves of other whiskey writers, which is great. You continue to pay homage to these writers. and they're whiskey experts and their expertise. And these are people that you respect. And there's another forum of people online that you have less respect for. And we understand that. We talk about that later, maybe. But here's the quote. When you find the real experts, you'll know it. They tend not to be those who wear their expertise on their sleeves, but rather are considered helpful and sometimes very generous with their time and advice. That's page 162. And in your reference to these individuals, I said it before, Billy Abbott, Becky Paskin, David Broom, Charles McLean, David Nicogamo, you put them in there. It's a nod to good friends and people you admire. Now, is it people you admire most or best friends, or was it a combination before I go on to the next part?
Well, no, it's I see Billy Abbott's there.
Hey, Billy. What are you going to say about that?
No, these so two things. First of all is that, I said earlier when we were talking about the illustrations that I wanted the book to be inclusive. And I decided that although I had a lot of things I wanted to say in the book, and mostly I got round to saying them, that people just didn't want to hear what I was going on about. And there were some issues or some not issues, but some things where it was really interesting just to get other people's opinion and put them in the book. Now, normally you might be able to do this if you're writing a book and you can find quotes in newspapers or magazines. But this group of people had not had an opportunity necessarily to speak about the different things I wanted their opinions on.
Yep.
So I put them together. They're people I've known for a long time, most of them, and worked with in one capacity or another. Of course, I've got respect for their opinions and views, because I wouldn't have put them in the book if I didn't had respect for them. And I asked all of them a load of questions, and some people gave me great answers and are in the book quite a lot. Others maybe just gave me one brilliant answer, and that's in. And I just think it gives the book quite a lively feel as well. Like I say, it's not as if you're being preached at by one person for 300 pages or however long it is.
Well, I'm okay being preached. If I'm buying your book, I want to hear from you. But this was fun. And I'm wondering if you think they all have the aesthetic, romance, emotion of whiskey that you did, the same passion, all these individuals. I'm guessing that's why you're linked.
Oh, yes.
Come out, right?
Yeah. All the people I spoke to, serious people I consider to be serious whiskey people. And they're people that have got... if you're going to be a really serious whiskey person, you have to give a piece of your heart to it, and these people all got heart, and they've got whiskey in their hearts, so that was why I was very happy to welcome their contributions.
Well, let's hope that Billy liked the answer you gave to him, so I'm sure it's good.
Billy's got a lot of heart.
Yes, he does. He's a lovely individual and someone who's always got a story as well. And he said that about you just recently with me. But he did. He's someone that you could, someone you can give a 2 or 3 word description, and other instances will come to mind with him, and he can bring things together. He's a sharp guy. He's good.
The other thing, Dolph, I'll just say,
yep,
is that I'm not the best whiskey taster in the world, and I'm certainly not the best writer of tasting notes, And so one of the reasons for getting these people in as well, I should say this, is that some of them had skill sets that I simply do not have, and I've got a lot of respect for those skills. People like Dave and Charlie, Billy, these are great tasters, and they can really articulate what they've got in the glass.
And I'm in the same position as you are, and I'm in awe. And some people are just very good at it. They have that innate ability. And my wife has a much better palate than I do. And if I'm ever stuck, we usually drink the same whiskeys. We share them. I give her blind. She gives me blind whiskeys. We try that. She doesn't go online. She doesn't talk to anybody really. And in tastings, she doesn't say very much because she's more of an introvert. I'll just say anything just to get a reaction. But if I need something, she's there. And the tasting notes are very attuned for her. It's great. And so it's good to have those friends, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Privilege.
Another appears to be the area of interest for you. So we're talking about the other end. So let's twist this a little bit. The quote's up there. I'll read the whole thing. The world of whiskey, particularly unconstrained as it now is by the internet, is like a sea awash with voices all shouting to be heard above the noise of the rushing waves. Some of this expertise is genuine, some is assumed, and some is imaginary. So many experts, so little expertise can at times feel like a very apt critique of the industry at large. So when you venture online, be sure to take care to listen of who you listen to. That's page 162. Now, I do believe that there's a place in our lives for where free time is really precious, where we have the 5-10 minute connoisseur, someone who can give me the information. Dave Broom's one, and I think I talked to you about this previously. There was the World Masterclass. It was a course that you had, but he also had his tasting notes on probably 200 whiskeys that were there, and it was fantastic. Click, you get it. And I like that. But it again, can you think of some individuals or sites that can give the quality information we deserve in a quick time frame? So that was one for me that I referred, but you can't get that from Broom unless you paid for that in the past. So anything free out there where you have faith in them, where you're going to get the small snippet of good information.
Well, I mean, you know, you got to say Whiskey Fun, Serge Valentin's website.
Yep.
Which, you know, is well, it's funny for a start, which I like. But the tasting notes are really good, and they're well, like I say, well considered, well thought through. Now covers not just Scotch whiskey, but a whole range of other whiskies and rums and other spirits. And Serge has a scoring system,
okay,
which is one of the few scoring systems I can tell you that will drive sales on the shelf.
Okay. All right.
And they're reliable scores. I mean, it's quite interesting if you ever go back and look at, because they do taste whiskies again, you know, so they come back to whiskies after a few years and stuff like that. And it's
as
really
opposed to just the whiskey of the year. This is scores on certain categories. And
yeah. So I find that really useful. There's the huge website. Is it Whiskey Base, which is a really good place. And Ruben's Whiskey Notes, very, very, very good as well.
Okay, I don't know. Ruben's Whiskey Notes. I'll just
Ruben's Whiskey Notes. Yeah. So these are not opinionated, very well informed, good tasting notes, good judgment, and those are the sort of places I would go to.
All right, and we're going to talk about other categories of people. So. And another quote. There we go. Here's the new quote. And I'm not sure why, but the most compelling category of individuals in Whiskey People chapter is the awkward squad. I just love this. So an industry like Scotch whiskey needs to have the awkward squad, the square pegs who delight in not fitting into the round hole predestined for them. So why do you think so? Is it because we take ourselves too seriously? We're too strict? We're too struck on tradition that we like this, or that you need this?
Well, I think to an extent, I think I mentioned this earlier, but I think you need to have people who are not going to be fully bound by, you know, the way you're supposed to behave. Yeah. And you know, the way you're supposed to do things, or what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to do it. So if you recall earlier, I did talk about disruptors, and actually these people in the awkward squad, some of whom people will know about, some of whom AJ Bell, for example, they might not remember or have heard of, but they're people that really did things differently. They took absolute delight in, as we say in the UK, in winding up the establishment. And my goodness, people like AJ Bell, who won a very famous court case against United Distillers. I mean, he set a trap for them and they walked straight into it. It's absolutely brilliant to go, and you should go and read that if you haven't. Mark Rainier, of course, who just loved winding people up. I mean, he just couldn't help himself but do that. And also in there, I think I probably would have Jack and Wallace Milroy and people like that who didn't. I can tell you, talking to Jack Milroy, I mean, they did not understand the term rules of doing business. They just did things exactly as they wanted to. So these people, I think automatically everyone's sort of attracted to those sort of people, or you ought to be.
I think. Yeah.
And they bring energy, and I mean, even when I was getting furious every time I saw another Mark Rainier Brewercladdy press release, sort of back in the early 2000s, at the same time, I was just so entertained by it. It was just great. So you got to have
Waterford, everything with Waterford, and again, talking about, sorry, we won't even discuss it now. Right. I will add one. I'll add Pip Hills to that because
he's in there. He's definitely in there. Same thing. So I think it's getting near dinner time.
All right, we're going to wrap up. Before your final comments, I just want to say this. So thank you. I want to thank you for both the whiskey book sections, your choices, and those of your writer compatriots, because I do like it. And when people suggest books to read, but you did that for yourself and you asked others, the other people that you trust, who they thought they should read as well. So both those sections, and in itself, it's worth the price of the book just having those two at the back of the book. So thank you very much for that. Kind sir, is any last words? Anything we would like to touch on that we haven't touched on yet?
No, I think it's been a very wide-ranging conversation. I'm just very grateful for you having me back and giving me another opportunity to chat to you and to whoever's going to look at this about the book. It's a good read. I personally think everyone should have it on their whiskey bookshelf.
Great.
And like I say, I think it's a bit provoking. It's quite well informed, and I hope it's entertaining as well, which is very important.
It was, and a very quick read. Not that there's not lots of information, but I delved in fairly quickly and just, I couldn't put it down. For me, I usually read a book within a week, and this was 2.5 days or 2.5 nights. Went straight through, was so happy with it. Even writing all the notes and the margins that I destroy my books with the notes and the margins. I'm probably going to buy a new one and have you sign it at one point in time. But
I'd love to do that.
The notes on the side and like I said, my books will be worth nothing except an insight of my children into the mind and the workings of my mind when they read all the squigglies on the side. So, that's all the time we have, whiskey brothers, sisters, friends. It's been a fantastic morning for me, early afternoon for me, actually, evening for this gentleman right here. I told you I'd have a hard time.
I'm there. Yeah, I'm there.
Thanks to our listeners who joined us today and who will do so in the future. And special thanks again to Dr. Nicholas Morgan. Maybe we'll talk about The Long Stride because I really want to do that book with you. And I haven't read it yet, and I won't until we delve into it together. We'll see you all in the future. We'll either be talking to Davin de Carcamo or Hans Offringa, both of them having quick new books coming out. We're talking to both. I'm not sure who's first. And as a final note, if you don't want to miss a minute of these, you click like and subscribe. So as always, here's to good company. Here's to good whiskey, which I had. And the double black is very good. People should know that. Here's to good conversation. Thank you again, kind sir. Sláinte to you all. Have a fantastic day. Cheers.
Thank you.